Okay, good morning everyone. Unfortunately, we're not quorate. We're well represented from the private sector, but from the local government side, a lot of my colleagues are ill or couldn't make it. So we will be making decisions, but they will have to be ratified at a later stage. I think, Liz, you need to talk to us about changes in officers here. Do you want to mention that now?
I can indeed, thank you, Chair. So you'll notice that normally Melanie Corcoran attends these meetings. The one before Christmas was her last one because she has now moved into an interim role as Chief Operating Officer as part of the Combined Authorities restructure. So we may well see Melanie at these meetings, but that's her new role. I've taken on a role as of just before Christmas to be the Director of Policing, Environment and Place. And so this committee falls very squarely within that remit, so I'll be supporting Councillor Jeffrey and the committee on that basis. There are a few other changes to staffing in the organisation, but probably for now we can cover those at a later date as and when questions arise.
Okay, thanks very much, Liz. So obviously we have apologies for absence, which you have them.
So we've had apologies from Amir Hussain, Councillor Ross-Shaw, Councillor Scott, Councillor Byford, Councillor Hayden and Councillor Crackhill.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I draw your attention to declaration of interest? Anyone? Helen?
Just for complete transparency, it's not my organisation, but one of the projects is a member of West Yorkshire Partnership. So,
okay, thank you. Okay, and then if we have any exempt information, obviously we'll have to have exclusion of the press, but I'm not sure we have today. No. Okay, fine. Can we agree the minutes of the 3rd of November? Seems a long time ago now.
Agreed.
Yeah. Can we agree them?
They have to be agreed at the next board.
Oh, at the next meeting. Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay. Excuse me. The evidence report. It's Thomas that's doing this. Yeah. Hi, Thomas.
Yeah. Morning, Chair. Yeah. So as usual, I've got a few slides to present. Hopefully, some a bit more positive than usual. But I'll get going. So the main sort of reason for the research intelligence team sort of presenting to the Police Committee is largely to sort of update on state of the region indicators that are relevant to the committee. So I'll start with those first. So there's currently since the last meeting there have been 5 state of the region indicators that have been updated. One of those is net additional dwellings, and they have rebounded pretty sharply in most areas across West Yorkshire, and indeed across West Yorkshire as a whole. So last year, or the figures for 2020 to 2021, we saw a pretty sharp decline, and that was largely due to the sort of effects of the pandemic sort of taking hold within the figures, and they've now returned to pre-pandemic trends. You'll see there that Kirklees is the only sort of district within West Yorkshire that hasn't seen an increase in net additional dwellings over the past 12 months. We've spoken to colleagues at Kirklees, and they've sort of said that they currently have over 8,000 new dwellings with planning permission, so an uptick is likely within the next 12 months. Just a bit of a lag there.
Chair, if I could come in there, we did rather hope and cold a day out of an early Christmas present of the letter from the inspector about our local plan, but obviously it wasn't under the tree on Christmas morning. We are expecting a letter from the inspector any day now, and like Kirklees, we expect to see a real upturn coming year.
That's great, thank you.
Good to hear. Yeah. Disappointing that it didn't come as you expected.
Moving on to private sector rents, they've risen sharply over the past year. So you can see that this chart shows how private sector rents have changed since 2016, and they've largely been pretty stable. But over the last sort of 12 months or so, with the effects of interest rate rises that have sort of had a knock-on effect. We've seen them rise quite sharply. And another sort of thing that I just want to draw your attention to really on this chart is, I guess, what's kind of going to be the next point along, and it's likely again to rise pretty sharply this year. So we know that if buy-to-let landlords want to pass on the entire sort of increase in their costs, then rents will rise by a further 20%, and that's on top of the 10% that they rose by last year. So, for example, in Leeds, that would take average private sector rents to £900 a month, and that's a £150 increase on this year, every single month, and a 50% increase on 2016. So, with obviously rising energy bills, food costs, it's likely that there's going to be an even further squeeze on living costs in the next sort of 12 months. Moving on to energy efficiency, West Yorkshire continues to perform below the England average, and that's particularly present during the current energy crisis. Obviously, if your house is less energy efficient and you need to use more energy is sort of more expensive than it usually is now. So West Yorkshire is sort of going into this crisis and staying in this crisis on a worse footing than the rest of the country is. Just this week, the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee said that it would require a quote-unquote war effort to improve energy efficiency, and if it's going to take that at the national level, it'll probably take even more at the West Yorkshire level, so that's not particularly good. And we can sort of back that up with a report from the Centre for Cities, which showed that Bradford is the third most expensive place in the UK to heat at home. And that's an effect of sort of the poor energy efficiency, the higher sort of standing charges that we see in West Yorkshire as well, just sort of combining to have a pretty bad effect across West Yorkshire as a whole, but particularly within Bradford at the minute. And then this last chart on sort of state of the region indicators comes with a couple of caveats, I guess, in that these are pretty unprecedented times for sort of energy costs and fuel poverty, and we've had to extrapolate the data that's provided by the End Fuel Poverty Coalition. But essentially what it shows is that by April, it's possible that 1 in 2 households in West Yorkshire are going to be in fuel poverty, and that's up sort of significantly from the previous projections of sort of 1 in 3 households. Now, a big sort of reason for that uptick is because when we get to April, not only will the £400 energy bill relief scheme end, but the energy price guarantee will also rise by £500 up to £3,000 a year. So essentially, on the 1st of April, energy bills are going to rise by £900 per year, just overnight. And that's just more than a lot of people can stomach. So while this does come with a lot of caveats, we can sort of back it with that evidence. Plus, obviously, energy bills are at an all-time high, which means that we would expect fuel poverty to rise quite sharply. And the poor EPCs that we've just sort of discussed means that West Yorkshire is going to need more energy than the national average. So while we might not get to sort of 1 in 2 households in fuel poverty, things are sort of worse than they are nationally in West Yorkshire, and they're going to get worse as well. So we're fairly confident. Well, we're definitely confident in the trend, and fairly confident within the sort of figures that are presented there. Interestingly, actually, Cornwall Insight this week have sort of predicted that wholesale gas prices are going to fall across Europe, and that would put the predicted price cap at £2,800, which is below the energy price guarantee. Now, what we're currently seeing across a lot of sort of commentators and sort of think tanks is that what that's showing is that the energy price guarantee is quite ineffective, really, because it's sort of holding energy prices above where the market would have them, sort of from July onwards. So there's probably a need for sort of greater government intervention there to sort of support households through this crisis. Just a couple of quick slides on the macroeconomy. Obviously, with the current sort of issues affecting the economy, it's sort of worth just touching on this a little bit. So this chart shows CPI inflation and the sort of how each sector feeds into inflation as well. So we can see the breakdown sort of by cost areas, and food prices and household costs are the current key drivers of inflation. So in the last in the year to November, food prices rose at the fastest rate since 1977. So we're sort of seeing really high prices of grain and wheat, and that's sort of even greater at sort of the sort of least cost foods as well. So I think I've touched on this before, but basically those sort of budget brand sort of food items are increasing at a faster rate than sort of the average food item, if you like. So people who were already buying those items sort of have to just pay that additional price. There's nowhere for them to move to, and their option is essentially to either pay the higher price or don't buy the food, don't eat. So while we've got that going on, we've also got transport costs that are sort of having a bit of a dampening effect. So transport costs on this chart here are the green bar that runs sort of through the middle, and you can see how that sort of shrunk as a proportion over the past year. Now what that means is that transport costs are still rising, but they're rising more slowly than they have been, and that's largely due to sort of fuel costs that are sort of going up at a slower rate, and second-hand cars that are falling sharply. So we saw over the summer that second-hand cars increased in price really quickly because there was just a shortage of new cars, if you like. That shortage seems to have been overcome largely, and they're now sort of coming back into the market. So to help bring inflation back to the 2% target, the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England increased the base rate to 3.5%. An economic theory would sort of tell you that increasing the interest rate would reduce spending and cool those sort of inflationary pressures. So we expect them to sort of we expect inflation to fall to about 5% over the course of this year, but whether it will or not sort of remains to be seen, I suppose. And then the final slide from me is just this one from the Bank of England's Financial Stability Report, which looks at sort of mortgages across the UK. So what the chart on the left-hand side shows is that 70% of mortgages are going to see an increase between now and 2025, and of those mortgages seeing an increase, more than half will be by more than £100 per month. So this sort of this is brought about largely by the increase in interest rates that sort of pass on to homeowners and mortgages. But yeah, I guess that the key point within this sort of chart is to show that these sort of cost issues on cost pressures on household costs are here to stay for at least the medium term, if not the long term as well. So just to touch finally on sort of what the Combined Authority are doing, we have sort of the Mayor's Fairs that we've sort of publicised quite widely, that's making public transport more affordable and accessible for people, and also we've introduced a £1 million fund to support businesses with rising energy costs up to £5,000 per business. And yeah, just again to finally touch on implications, there are a lot of implications around inclusive growth. Some evidence before Christmas showed that people on prepayment meters are less likely to be in receipt of the energy bill relief scheme. And in December, 1 million vouchers went unclaimed across the UK. So while people who pay the bills by direct debit have the discount applied automatically, people on prepayment meters have to actually sort of physically claim the voucher. So it gets posted out to them and they take it to a post office. And they aren't being claimed for one reason or another. So people who sort of are on prepayment meters, often forced on prepayment meters by providers, aren't receiving that support that they need. And then just finally, there's a report from the New Economics Foundation which shows that by the next election, so December 2024, 1 in 2 working families with kids will be able to afford a decent standard of living. And when you look at sort of different demographic breakdowns, that rises to 85% of single parent families not able to afford a decent standard of living, and 85% of working age households with a disability. So things are getting pretty bleak, and it's a sort of really stark issue that's obviously affecting a lot of people, but is also having a disproportionate effect on those on low incomes and those with disabilities. And that was everything from me. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I bet you really enjoyed presenting that report. I think we're all thoroughly depressed. It makes really grim reading and grim hearing, and particularly that West Yorkshire is in a worse place than anywhere else. Any comments or questions on this report? Helen?
Thank you, Chair. I found the whole pack this time a very interesting read, and it's looking at how we join all of these things together, the jigsaw pieces, to get a whole vision and a plan. So I was just wondering, you talked about some of the things that's been done, like the Mayor's Fairs and the £1 million energy fund. I just wonder how this report is used strategically to help set priorities, and how we might be able to disseminate it more widely so that other partners can use this information to align to the regional priorities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So within the Research Intelligence team, we provide packs like this on a monthly basis in the form of monthly economic and transport insights reports, and they get published on the website, so they're sort of publicly available. But yeah, I completely take your point on sort of making sure that they're sort of falling into the right hands, if you like, and making sure that we're not just sort of putting it on the website and then it's getting ignored, because yeah, something needs to be done about it, really, doesn't it? So yeah, I'll take that away and sort of think about how we disseminate that more widely.
Yes, thank you. I mean, at the risk of sounding a bit like a crack record, I've been to 3 of these meetings and this has been a similar message 3 times. But you know, it is frankly shocking that there might be 1 in 2 people in fuel poverty. And as you say, you've mentioned about the national approach needs to be on a war footing. And sadly, I just don't think that the £2 bus journeys and £1 million is enough. It's nowhere near enough, is it? And I appreciate there's a limit to what WICA can do, but I've said it before. I think we need to send the strongest possible message back to the mayor and the mayor's group of mayors, that this issue of the fuel. You highlighted Bradford and being paid, having different standing charges. These are national level issues that are affecting people deeply in West Yorkshire, and we need it's at that national level that needs to get sorted out. There needs to be a wholesale reform of this energy market. It's proven that it's been complete farce, hasn't it? So I think that's what I would like to see, and I'd like more money. Obviously, we'd like to do more things, and maybe we need to. Maybe we can fund initiatives to help people claim those vouchers and things. But the reality is, it is still quite a small drop in the ocean, and we need to get those messages back up from this committee, back up to the highest level that people are going to be really suffering. I think next year, if they're not already. Frankly.
I think they are. I think people are suffering already, but this report, it just sets out some really grim reading, and we can't just note this report and move on. We have to raise this high level. I don't know whether you want to comment, Liz, about how we can move this forward with Tracy, and perhaps Tracy approaches government.
Thank you, Anne, and I know it feels like we have the same conversation, but I think it's important to keep it in the spotlight because of everything that Tom has said. We do take, I think as I said last time, as many opportunities as we can to kind of influence ministers whenever they come up to see us, and we write to them. There is the budget that is coming up. I can't remember the date of it, but that's another significant opportunity, I think, for government to set out its plans. So we have plans in place to influence that budget, working with kind of colleagues around the table, and so it might be interesting to see if anybody else is submitting anything into the government around what the budget proposition is. We might want to compare some notes on that. So happy to talk afterwards if organisations are doing that, because I think there's some important kind of key messages that I think we should be trying to influence. But that's again another key point for us.
I think really we do need to do more. I think Ben's right, and I think we're all sitting here thinking the same. And Stephen's going to come in a minute, but the £2 fare. I've raised it before in Wakefield District. It didn't really have a success because a lot of the fares were cheaper than £2. And what did Arifa do? They bumped everything up to £2. So it didn't really help people in our rural areas who were paying £1.30 or £1.20, and then everything went up to £2. So I know it's a start, and the million is a start, but there's a lot that we need to do if we're going to look after people in this district.
Thank you, Chair. I think for me, I mean, there's mention elsewhere about an ambition that children don't grow up in poverty. I know we tag fuel onto poverty, but this is, as far as a big household bill, this is poverty. 50% of households in poverty. From my perspective, in plain English, that seems to be what we're talking about. And as we as Ben's mentioned, as we talked about it before, that there's going to have a knock-on impact on blue lights, health and services and councils as well. So I think we should be pushing for that note about escalating, but it should, in reality, if we don't do it here, the money's going to be somewhere else. So we're just kicking the can down the road unless we do something a bit more proactively. I think one of the interesting things, and I don't know how validated this is, but a really stark fact that was mentioned to me the other day was that if you imagine what do you think the earnings are of somebody who's in the top 1% in the UK? If you look and say, what do you think an earner is who's in the top 100%? I'm not going to force people; it's not a test, but I would stop. It's 120,000. So if you look at that at your own costs, and imagine what that must be like on those lower income families, that is very stark. That was an alarming figure. You'd think, it'd be £1 million a year or something. No, it's not. It's much lower than that. It's crazy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just you made me think of a point that I've had a few conversations about recently, about how we actually evidence the fact that a lot of the impact is further down the line in terms of impact on health service, impact on social care, of not doing something now, of people ending up in poverty, but actually across the investments that we make, just in terms of, very often we think about transport in terms of a journey time, but actually there are so many impacts along the line that end up as cost to the government, and we don't do enough to really evidence that, I don't think. I don't know whether you guys have had any thoughts around that, to make that stronger message, I suppose. I know it's hard, don't get me wrong. I know that's a big thought, but
Yeah, I think it's just really difficult.
I think following on from this report, though, obviously it just says that we look at the report and evidence as part of decision making, but I do think, Liz, that we need to raise this with Trace, with the mayor, and get this to the to the combined authority meeting. Perhaps we could raise it initially at the leaders' meetings with the mayor, and say how strongly this committee feel, and that we need to do more. And particularly, I think it's interesting that it has come from yourselves as private sector, that this is how you feel, and if we're all working together on this, I think we need to try and make a difference. I don't want this committee just to sort of note reports and move on. I want us to do some direct action. And I know money's difficult, but if we're not helping the people of West Yorkshire, then what are we doing? You know, so I think if you could put it into the system, Liz, that how strongly the committee feel about this, and that we want some direct action really on it. Would that be okay with everyone? Yeah, okay, fine. So if we can agree the recommendation but add to it that we're going to raise this with Tracy, and hopefully she can raise it with the mayors, and try and get something going with government. We really must. We can't just sit back and note something and move on. Think, oh, it doesn't affect us so individually, but it's all the people that we represent. Okay, thanks very much for the report. Sorry it was so depressing for us all. Right, the West Yorkshire plan. Is it Jo that's doing this? Jo?
Thank you, Chair. Hi everyone, I'm Jo Barham, Policy Officer in the Strategy Team at the Combined Authority. So I was just going to say a few words about the paper and appendix that have been circulated before opening up for feedback. So the paper sets out what the purpose of the West Yorkshire Plan is. So it's intended to be a regional document to clearly articulate a shared vision, story and ambition for West Yorkshire. So we previously had the SEP, the Strategic Economic Plan, which did this job, but it was also predominantly about driving funding for the growth deal. And we currently have the SEF, the Strategic Economic Framework, which is a collection of all of our policies and strategies in an overarching framework. But what the West Yorkshire Plan will do will set the trajectory for the long term up to 2040, and it will reflect changes that have happened in the region, most notably the devolution deal. So that when we're engaging with stakeholders, speaking to government, we can set out that shared ambition with a consistent message about the region. And it gives us that ability to be very clear about our aims and objectives and not sort of reacting as things change. So Appendix 1 that was circulated is an early draft of the West Yorkshire Plan. Just want to stress at this point that it is a draft, and so the reason we've come to committees at this stage is we want feedback, we want input, and we want to help this shaped. So we thought it was easier to have something to comment upon, but it's very much still a working document that we want feedback on. The work to date has focused probably more on the vision and the story narrative element of the plan. So what we've tried to do there is use the data that we have about the region, but to tell a story, to sort of focus more on the qualitative aspects, to bring together a compelling narrative about West Yorkshire. So as well as the vision and narrative, there are 3 regional priorities included: tackling the climate emergency, growing an inclusive economy and enabling equality, diversity and inclusion. And these will drive all of our work across the region. Then there's a series of aims of what we want to achieve across our policy areas. And then there's going to be a list of ambitious targets for the region. Just picking up on the point in the last discussion, so the idea is that these targets, these ambitions, will align with the State of the Region reporting. So we've got that consistency back to those indicators, so that what we say we want to achieve, we are looking back at the indicators that align to these. So there's still work to be done on agreeing that list, but the plan is very much to have that to align with the things that we've just been talking about that Tom updated on. So I mentioned the SEF earlier, so the West Yorkshire Plan will also act as an umbrella for all of our existing policies and strategies that we currently contain in the SEF. And when new strategies are developed, so for example the housing strategy, that will speak to the vision and the ambitions of the West Yorkshire Plan, so that those align. And the West Yorkshire Investment Strategy will still remain the document that sets out our funding priorities, for the projects that actually will help us to achieve these ambitions. And the next iteration of that then will have the vision of the West Yorkshire Plan as its strategic driving vision. So we're consulting at the moment, so we're going around to all of the committees. This is the first committee that we've gone to. We've also got conversations with business rep groups, universities, and a further draft will then be developed once we've collated all of that feedback from the various stakeholders. So I would really welcome input on the content of the draft, the language used, and crucially if there's anything that is missing from the draft, and that will be used to reshape the next stage of the plan. So I think I'll leave it there from the overview, and as I say, would welcome feedback please on the draft that's circulated.
Thanks for that, Joe. Any comments, any feedback? Helen?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Joe. I'm glad you mentioned the housing strategy, because when I was reading this, I was thinking about the fact that it needs to be something that everyone who's active in the region can look at and see how they can contribute towards it and align their strategies towards it. And I think there could be more about housing in it to help link it to the housing strategy. I would welcome that.
Absolutely.
Particularly because there's such a close link between housing and climate emergency, the retrofit programme and everything we need to do around that, and inclusive growth.
Thank you.
Thank you. So firstly, I really welcome this work. I think it's really good and really needed, actually. I think that sort of overall vision and narrative, the kind of handful of things that we need to talk about if we're talking about West Yorkshire and Leeds, is something that's going to be really good, really useful for us. I like the language, I like the way it's written, I like the it's just easy to read, it tells a story, I like that. I think one comment that I would probably make is that there's some stuff in there about greater cross-government engagement is needed. And I'd probably like to see a more positive language about that, like come with solutions rather than complaints. I hate that state use up, you know what I mean? How are we going to engage? What positive things are we going to? This is what we stand for. This is what we're all about. This is what we're going to do. Come with us on the journey, rather than we need you to do that for us. If that makes sense. That's it.
Yes, thank you. I thought that there was a few things that we could adjust. Really, the first thing was the comment about the West Yorkshire plan, and I'm a bit concerned about the branding. I mean, obviously, I know West Yorkshire Combined Authority, but who's the audience? I suppose is it people within West Yorkshire? Is it government? Is it international investors and so on? And you know, obviously we've got the Leeds City region and the LEP and so on. And I do think that, notwithstanding we're all separate local authorities, that there needs to be cognizant that we are part of the Leeds City region functional economy and footprint. And I think I'm just concerned about that branding. I think there needs to be mention of Leeds in the branding, just straight off the top in terms of the headline, the title, and then I think in terms of the content, and I feel as though there's some things that may be a little bit generic, and then some other things that we could do with being a bit more specific on. And even, dare I say it, I'm a bit concerned we might be being over ambitious. And I'd like to see a bit of a route map to what we mean. So what I mean by that is, obviously you've got priorities: inclusive economy, equality, diversity, and climate emergency. I feel as though they're just a bit generic and could be any city, really. You know, in any strategic economic plan these days, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think maybe we just need to tone those bits down, or at least articulate what we mean by those for the Leeds City region and West Yorkshire context. And then the bits where I suppose it's great ambition was the sort of the mass transit point and the net zero by 2038. And I suppose what well, when I was reading that, I was thinking, well, what do we actually mean by that? And for me, there's again two things. So, I've heard a lot about mass transit banded around over all my working career, and I know it's back on the table again. But I'm not even sure what that means currently. I mean, maybe people in this room know more than I do, and do know what that means. But I think you might need to say, this is what we actually mean when we say, because are we talking about one route, two routes? Are we talking about a full network? Is it tram train? Is it what is it? Is it buses? What does this thing look like? So I think you've got to show people, particularly on the mass transit point, what is the scale of the ambition? What do you mean? And, what is the ask of government? And it might be in that's containing other documents and things as well. So maybe some crossover and some plans and maps, being a simple surveyor. And the point about the net zero, again, I was kind of curious, what do we mean? Because again, you hear all this jargon, a bit of greenwashing or whatever. What does that actually mean? Zero carbon by 2038. It's not that far away. I'm still driving around in a petrol car. We've still got problems with bus routes. It's linked into mass transit, isn't it? But it's also linked into the housing and all that we've talked about. It's going to take decades to decarbonise the housing stock. So what does actually net zero carbon by 2030 mean? Does that mean anything new that's built is net zero? Or we talk about the historic legacy? Or we talk about transport? Or we talk about employers? What do we actually mean by that? So again, I thought that was it's a very laudable ambition, but I think we need to be a bit more kind of specific about what that means and what it means for Leeds. So I hope that was helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you. I think one of the challenges with this piece of work is, you're absolutely right, a lot of the detail is contained in those supporting strategies which set out, for mass transit, for net zero and things, and it's trying to find a way to sort of represent the linkage between those things because we kind of can't put every single strategy, hundreds and hundreds of pages, so it's just trying to get that level right. But I absolutely take your point that, we could probably flesh out and make more of a links maybe to some of where the further information is. And I think one of the things will be, once we've got the text right, it's the kind of, what does the published document look like? What does the website look like? How do we explain how all those elements fit together? So I think there's definitely a piece on that.
Thank you, Chair. I thought it's really incredibly helpful, isn't it, to have that vision and narrative and to set the tone for all the rest of the strategies within the combined authority and beyond. And I think for me, it was, and I agree with Helen's point, it'd be great to have housing through there in the ambitions. But I think it'd be really helpful if to accompany it, and actually really appreciate the opportunity to consult on it as well. I think that's really welcome. But it'd be great to be able to have almost an infographic which demonstrates the linkages between all of the different strategies, because as Helen said, reading through the pack of documents today, there's so many different linkages across. Well, the evidence base determines the thinking and that overall vision and strategy, and then, as you say, there's lots of different things that pin into that. So I think having that represented would be really helpful to see, particularly how it relates to the investment strategy and other things, so we can see how they all connect and how they're all informed by each other. That'd be really helpful.
Thank you, Chair. And coming back to Ben's point, in some areas I thought it could be a bit more ambitious. Sorry, this is what happens when you try and do things with consultations, isn't it? So, for example, around the community, as well as housing, housing is obviously very integral to communities, and I think to actually offer some hopeful vision for communities linked to the green agenda, 15-minute communities or local circular economies, that kind of thing, would actually be something that people might be able to grab hold of and see how they could be part of that.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I don't want to be not ambitious for the region. I think I think it's more about a route map. I've wrote down the words route map, and so when we're talking about mass transit, you know, I think in high level terms, just articulating what's phase one of that, what's phase two of that, how does that link into the strategic priority areas that I know are on the papers lower down and so on. So there's lots of, it's a bit of showing us a bit of a stepping stone. Same with the route map, you know, what to zero carbon. I think articulating what that means might involve saying, well, by 2028, it's going to be this. By 2030, it's going to be looking like this. So that it can be a little bit measurable to a certain extent as well.
Joe, was you plan to obviously take the comments on board and then go on to the next step and then come back to the committee?
Yeah, I think, as I say, so we're doing kind of going around all of the committees in this next in this wave, and then we will come back then with the next draft with those feedback. And if there's anything kind of, I would really welcome kind of any of the specifics, details of things. If people want to get in touch to add those in, that would be really helpful.
That would be helpful if anyone wants to send comments to Joe, it would be really helpful. Thanks very much for that, Joe. Can we agree the recommendation? Sorry, keep forgetting to switch on. The programme development, creating great places, infrastructure. Justin.
Oh, no, sorry. That's all right. That's okay. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Justin Wilson's on leave today, so I'm going to cover this paper for Justin. So this paper sets out details of programme development activity that's ongoing within the Place and Environment team at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. So it's programme development activity that aligns to the investment priority that's most closely aligned to this committee, which is creating great places and accelerated infrastructure. So you might recall a previous discussion on this in summer where we brought a number of themes to committee. Those are set out in the paper, paragraph 2.4. So there was a good discussion at that meeting, and there was broad support for the work to continue across all of the themes that we presented. So the team have now done further work around programme development to develop all of those priorities and proposals. So high-level proposals for each of those themes have been worked up, and those have been assessed against some criteria. The criteria are in the paper, and that process has kind of helped us to work out which are the emerging set of priorities that we then wanted to bring back to you today to get your initial views on. So there are 6 things in the paper which have emerged as a priority. All of them are focused on areas of market failure or where it's likely that we'll be able to leverage additional funding, which was something that you were particularly keen that we do when we had our last discussion. So I won't go through all of the areas in detail, but just in headline terms. So the first is the Housing Accelerator Fund. So the purpose of that is to get sites into an investment ready position where business cases can be developed for projects to enter into capital funding programmes or secure private sector investment. So that builds on work already ongoing around the Housing Revenue Fund, which as a committee you're already familiar with. The second is an Employment Accelerator Fund. So that's a proposal to have a dedicated revenue fund for employment sites. That builds on the success of the Enterprise Zone programme, which many of you will be familiar with. And it's a similar programme to the Housing Fund. So it will be used to test viability or barriers to investment, and will support securing third-party investment or bidding for public sector capital investment in employment sites. That's the second one. The third one in the paper is spatial priority areas. So you're all familiar with our set of spatial priority areas. The proposal is that we start to work a little bit more actively on some of those. So securing some funding to look at the long-term delivery models for some of those long-term growth and regeneration locations. The fourth is our flood capital infrastructure programme. So that's a long-term priority for both this committee and the climate committee. We already have a pipeline of 24 capital flood schemes which has been built in partnership with all of our district partners and the Environment Agency. So the funding gap is detailed in the paper. It's quite high. It's 52 million. So based subject to views of the committee today, we would continue to explore how we might fund and phase those schemes. The next priority in there is digital infrastructure. There's two things detailed there. The first is about using revenue funding to scale up digital innovation, and the second is about targeting areas of market failure in the rollout of gigabit capable broadband. There's a couple of options that are listed at paragraph 2.33, so things like voucher programs. Again, we would continue to develop those subject to your views. And then the final priority is around the natural environment. So IP3 also refers to green infrastructure. So there is a crossover here with work of the Climate and Environment Committee and our Climate and Environment Plan priorities. But subject to your, so the feedback you gave us last time was that this was particularly important, acknowledging that access to high quality natural environment is key to healthy and resilient populations and places. So a couple of the things that are in early stages of programme development based on your feedback are the White Rose Forest Green Streets and then the Safer Parks work, which Helen's going to present a little bit on later. So again, feedback on whether those remain a priority would be really helpful. So the final section of the paper is about a proposed framework for assessing schemes before they enter into pipelines. So there's some initial criteria set out in the paper, but a more detailed framework is in development. So the pipelines that we already have in place, so for example the Housing Revenue Fund or our flood programmes, there are kind of detailed criteria or scorecarding approaches for those pipelines, and we're not seeking to replicate or supersede that. This is a kind of overarching framework, and one of the things that it would be particularly useful for is a lot of the things we've described are about revenue funding programmes to get things to a point that they're investment ready. So where we have capital asks around projects or things emerge through our pipelines that need capital funding, this framework would help us to identify which things are suitable for public sector investment. So it's in early stages of development. We would bring it back to you for comment, but it was really just to get a sense of whether you think it's the right thing to do and of the criteria that we've listed. We're particularly interested in your thoughts on E that's listed there in the paper around where sites can produce a commercial return rather than us looking at grant options. That's something we're particularly keen as an organisation to focus on, given that our funding options are so limited. So I'll leave it there. There is quite a lot of detail in the paper. There's various colleagues around the table that are leading on some of those project development and programme development activities that might be able to help answer any questions. And I'll pass back to you, Denise, for any questions.
Yeah, that's fine. I think the paper does cover a lot of the discussion that we had earlier in the summer. So I think that's really welcome. Any comments? Stephen?
Hi, thank you, Chair. I think that I've made this comment before, but I think in terms of the digital stuff, I think, and also going back to the thing about poverty and where we're going to be with those households and how much digital is going to have a transformational impact on lives, I really do think we need to be mapping where those schools are going to fall across West Yorkshire in terms of the rollout of the programmes, because it will be so divisive. You know, you'll get some schools that are not going to have access to gigabit infrastructure for possibly 10 years. You know, and you imagine the difference in those in the education that's delivered to those children who are, and let's be really sort of, you know, black and white, rural versus urban. It's not quite like that, but let's just use that example. We're really going to have rural, the next generation of rural kids who are going to be disadvantaged versus urban in an area where there is a levelling up with digital across the whole of the UK and internationally as well. So I really do think it's a relatively straightforward exercise, but just map those schools in the district and say, have a date against them. And if there's something that's not within a reasonable time frame, let's work together as a, you know, public sector, private sector to say, right, what's the quickest we can get into there? How are we going to get use public investment or anchor tenancy? How are we going to get private sector investment into those areas? Or look at alternatives if we can't get gigabit in there. But I really do think it's gonna pay dividends in terms of all the skills that are coming out, and it links in with so many other things that we have from employability and other things. So that's one thing I would say it just needs to be marked on there, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just a point of clarification. Is that notice at 2.3 you talk about it's £12 million. Is that, are you talking about that being revenue for developing these themes? Because 12 million is pretty thin if it's spread across six big themes like this. So can you just clarify what that 12 million is, please?
Yeah, so that was the indicative allocation for this investment priority that was made at the Combined Authority earlier last year. We're not limited to that to that amount of funding. We're developing programmes here that we think are the right things for us to be investing in, and we'll apply resources as we can to ensure that they are successful.
Thank you. So does that mean we need to think about what the actual capital budget may be within each of these themes, which I hope would be tens of millions if we can get it. I don't know.
Yes, that's right. So part of the programme development activity will involve us thinking about what funding is required, what conversations we want to have with government about targeting funding, and what are our other options in terms of bringing in investment.
Yeah.
We haven't got as much money as we would all love to. Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a couple of comments. First, a bit of a specific one about the connected cities piece and smart cities, and probably a question for Justin actually if he was here. But just where that's at generally, in terms of, because I feel like it's cooled a bit. There was an awful lot of conversation about smart cities maybe 10 years ago, but with the perma crisis that we've talk about a lot. I don't know. I don't get a sense of where it's at the moment, so it might just be useful to get an update on what's happening in the world of smart cities.
You will bring that back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you don't have to be right now.
We'll bring that back.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be great. And the other point that I had was your question about sort of scale and strategic significance in terms of the criteria, and I just wonder if there's something to be said about sort of potential for impact. That I don't really feel that in the criteria that are there at the minute, because you could have some small things that actually could do an awful lot. I don't know how you assess that, but it's just another challenge for you all. Sorry. Yeah.
We'll give that some thought.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on the same point that Lisa made about, and Ben actually, because when I read this, I wasn't clear about the where the funding was going to come from for all of this, and were we setting priorities that we could then use to be opportunistic when other funds come available, and then we can fit the pieces into the jigsaw. I get that, but that comes back to Tamsin's earlier point about actually understanding how all these things fit together so that we can do that effectively. But really, if we've got a limited funding pot, we need to be trying to establish, using the evidence from earlier and other sources of evidence, what's going to have the biggest impact, and how do we get a sense of that?
Thank you. You might expect me to say this coming from Homes England, but just to say we're really supportive, particularly of the Housing Accelerator funding, the continuation of the Housing Revenue funding, and also the Spatial Priority Area Revenue funding. That sounds really interesting in terms of what it could achieve, and I think for me, I'm thinking that in the context of the strategic place partnership that we're talking about between Homes England and West Yorkshire, and it's about that ability to stand side by side to develop a pipeline. So whatever the funding solution, as Ben said, that this is about building a pipeline, isn't it? This is about investing now so that there is a pipeline of projects ready for investment ready, as Alison said earlier on. So for us, that's really important, because Homes England, we can come and stand side by side with you to work those things up. So yeah, just a recognition of what it's achieved already in terms of developing projects and the potential for it going forward, really.
I think that's important, Tasmin. I mean, Homes England are a big player in everything that we do and a great partner. So, you know, anything that fits and we all work together, it is the right way on that. Jay.
Thank you. Reflecting on this paper, I think makes me think back to the discussion on the previous two papers, which is basically about the dangers in some ways of us firefighting the current situation and not actually keeping our eye on the longer term things that we need to do. And the amount of money, colleagues are absolutely right around this table that the amount of money is tiny in comparison with the challenge. But I think the criteria in this paper is actually quite good, because it's looking at where we can use our combined authority money for leverage or opening up, or whether that's housing or flooding or other things. And it's using our money wisely and carefully to keep that longer term future in mind. You know, there's fuel poverty and giving people compensation in terms of their existing bills, but there's also retrofitting and the environmental challenge of our housing, existing housing stock and future housing stock. So it's that balancing really that as a committee we're going to have to think about all the time, is managing the here and now, but also keeping hold of how we might use that money to make the future a bit better. And it's really difficult at the moment, isn't it?
So can we agree the recommendation set out at 10.1 to 10.2? Okay, thank you. Item 8, special policy areas.
It's Hannah today.
Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. Right. The purpose of the report here on spatial priority areas is to ask for your approval or endorsement of 2 additional areas into the current set of priority locations agreed across West Yorkshire. We're also seeking endorsement of amendment to the boundary of one of the existing spatial priority areas, and some changes to the naming of 4 of the existing areas. So just as background, the original 36 spatial priority areas were developed in partnership with local authorities and endorsed by the combined authority in 2020. The purpose of them is to provide some focus for the largest or most strategic opportunities in the sub-region, seeking to achieve balanced growth. It's to support in developing some critical mass and increasing the status of these areas to attract investment, and to help to build for cases for funding, and when prioritising funding opportunities. An example of this was the investment zones bid, which we were able to respond to quickly because we'd already got spatial priority areas agreed. The priority areas have been kept under review with the local authority officers. We're now proposing to add 2 new ones. These are the Huddersfield Station to Stadium spatial priority area. This is a new regeneration opportunity in a sustainable and central location with links to the station and retail and leisure uses. It's intended to facilitate employment sector growth linked to the Health Innovation Campus that's proposed by Huddersfield University. Sits alongside some housing opportunities with potential links to the district heat network and some potential economic benefits to be explored about opening up the canal and river corridor. It's an SPA that's recognised as a future growth in the criteria. The second area we're looking to add is North Halifax Growth Area. This is a large area to the north of Halifax town centre, which takes in Boothtown, Ovenden, Mixenden and Illingworth. It forms a corridor out to the north and has a potential to support an additional 1,600 houses. Calderdale Council's agreed to develop a long-term strategic plan for the area early in 2022.
and there's an opportunity to build on existing secured funding and local strategic support tied into the inclusive growth agenda for this area, and looking at regeneration and upskilling of residents and improving access to employment as well. The scale of the housing in the area means that it's an investment location under the SPA criteria. And then finally, the proposed amendment is to the South Kirkby and South Emsall Extension SPA in Wakefield, and it's been extended to include an employment allocation and mixed-use site allocation to the east of that area, but the south of South Kirkby. This is to bring this area in line with the emerging local plan for Wakefield Council, and brings in an additional sort of around 51 hectares of employment plus a mixed-use area. The site's categorised as a future growth area within the SPAs, and as I say, could become an investment location once the local plan is adopted. So we're just asking committee members to approve those additions and those amendments, please.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Reba, I'm a project manager within the Economic Implementation team, and I've been asked to attend today's committee to share the key learnings that have arisen from the delivery of the Community Renewal Hub, Retrofit Hub scheme, and what the next steps are. Just to give a very brief, quick overview of the scheme, the Retrofit Hub was a pilot project that delivered across 2 areas in Bradford to test what the challenges there are in retrofitting hard-to-treat stone-built properties and to support training in the green economy. Delivery for this scheme started in January 2022 and aimed to support 100 householders living in Manningham and Toller Ward, and provide 40 adult learners with the skills, knowledge and experience needed to work in the growing green sector. By November 2022, the scheme had engaged with over 1,400 households, delivered 150 whole house retrofit plans, developed an architectural toolkit of designs and plans to demonstrate what the installation measures would look like on the properties that were surveyed, as well as introducing a retrofit module to 5 learners and provide these learners with employment ready skills. So jumping across to the key learnings, there's 4 that I want to highlight that span across the technical, financial and social impact. The first of which is a twin track approach is needed to engage with the community to raise their awareness as well as secure their buy-in. Retrofit is a term that is not well known outside the construction industry, and one of the key successes of this scheme is that we utilised bilingual local volunteers that were employed through Manningham Housing Association, which is a social housing provider well known within the region, as well as community champions and organisations who were well known within the area and provided the support that we needed in terms of communicating and engaging with the residents. The scheme did face some challenge in gaining resident buy-in. Residents were hesitant to sign up due to the fact that no works were being promised. We were just surveying their properties and creating a whole house plan, and from previous experience with schemes that left their homes in a state of disrepair. This resulted in some difficulties and challenges in generating sufficient referrals. However, the visible presence of the volunteers and Manningham Housing Association and the technical supplier all helped provide some legitimacy to the scheme, as well as secure resident buy-in. Therefore, one of the key recommendations and learnings is some great consideration needs to be taken into providing targeted community engagement. The scheme could have benefited from considering creative ways to engage with communities, as well as looking at interactive software that demonstrates what impact these measures could have in reducing their fuel bills, as well as what their properties would look like post-installation, and empower the householders to start improving the conditions of their properties. The second key learning is when we are setting up these projects and schemes, some consideration needs to be taken in. Some great consideration is needed to balance the cost of the measures against the life cycle of these measures. On average, the works that we had surveyed would cost each resident £31,000, and for low-income residents, that's a lot of money to spend. And the impact of the costs on private landlords who are less likely to invest in these measures when they will not directly benefit from the work is another key issue that needs to be considered. And we need to also be aware that we also need to have a careful think about making sure that no resident is left behind, whether they own the property directly or whether it's through a social housing provider or a private rented landlord. Some of the key challenges that are facing stone-built properties within the two areas are due to the way that the properties are built, with cellars and lofts. There's not enough room for suppliers to insulate internally and add features externally. Surveyors were able to identify wider issues which need to be resolved before any retrofit installation needs to be installed, one of which is the additional moisture that is generated in houses which is causing problems with damp, mould and condensation. And there are additional barriers when considering homes in conservation areas and the need to balance sustainability and preserving heritage features and make sure that the housing stock is fit for purpose. We found that it was not possible to do any work to the front of the properties of houses that have planning restrictions and are within conservation areas, as well as doing internal measures because it would reduce the living space of the residents. Finally, in terms of lessons learned, we found that there's a lack of appetite within the community to take up the offer of free skills training, and that is simply due to the fact that, again, the term retrofit is not well known outside the construction industry, and there's a lack of understanding of what roles and positions are available to learners once they complete the module. So a new approach to upskilling is required. Many learners want to know what salaries there are once they complete training, and maybe a bit more positive messaging about the wide range of roles that will be existed that is available to them. So in terms of next steps, we have collated a wide range of learnings, and we will be using this to feed into the development of new retrofit programs that are currently in development, one of which is a Better Homes Hub program, which is a regional project that is currently under development to scale up domestic retrofit properties across West Yorkshire and to inform the scope and activities that could potentially arise from this programme. Just to make everyone aware, a paper is being presented to Climate Committee next week about the Better Homes Hub programme, and one of the proposed activities is setting up a one-stop shop for residents and delivering area-based demonstrators to test the potential energy efficiency approaches. The programme is still being scoped, and further business case development will be undertaken later in the year. And one of the other main next steps is we are going to continue having conversations with Historic England and Bradford Council, who have recognised that there's a need to compromise between sustainable measures and maintaining buildings' heritage features. So we will continue having this conversation and potentially widen it across to all the other local authorities, so that there is some consistency of the retrofit work across West Yorkshire, and again, not leaving any resident behind. Thank you.
Thank you for the paper and the many lessons learned. I was somewhat astonished in the paper to read that retrofit wasn't a term that people recognised, and I wonder if there's something more meaningful term that people would understand. If retrofit isn't the right word, then let's find one that is. And I was interested in what you said about community engagement and the run-up, and clearly that's very important. We had a scheme, it's actually a new build housing scheme with one of our housing associations, Together Housing, just near Halifax Town Centre, and we did actually deploy the local ward councillors who knocked on doors, particularly in terms of the allied private sector housing, in order to improve, to upgrade, to retrofit their houses. And the councillors worked their socks off really to persuade people to put their own money into it, or to borrow money from the council to do it. So I think using your district ward councillors is also one of the ways in which you get adherence to the programme. But the other thing that struck me was this was a ridiculously short amount of time with an ambitious programme in terms of the skilling, the adult learning and the retrofit and private and public sector, it was very ambitious, and in some ways the findings are not surprising. I guess there is a question in this chair, is what happens differently next time? What happens differently? You've indicated some of the things to do with closer work in terms of the conservation and planning stuff, of course, more community engagement, perhaps a bit of a longer run-in. But what would you say was the absolute priority in terms of doing more work like this in the future for the combined authority?
Thank you for your comments. So I think one of the top priorities is just seeking and securing early engagement, of whether it's with residents or with Historic England, with the local authorities, with the key stakeholders, and just keeping them hooked on to the programme by providing regular updates. Like you said, it was an ambitious programme. We were originally given a 6-month remit to deliver this programme, and which was increased right up until the end of November. And so doing early engagement at the start of this, what we perceive to be a 6-month period, was just not feasible. So going forward, that's one of the key things that I'm really keen that we do, is speak to people early and just continue having those messages and getting their buy-in and their support and their advice.
Thank you, Chair. West Yorkshire Housing Partnership is very active in working towards the Better Homes Hub, because, as you've pointed out, Councillor Skunnion, it's relationships in a neighbourhood that are really important. So having all the local partners, local landlords, local ward councillors, local community groups, who can actually use existing relationships to talk to relevant people in the area and take a neighbourhood approach, I think in the early stages is one way of actually spreading the message, getting people to understand it, getting private landlords to understand it, getting all the stakeholders to understand all the challenges, and actually start removing obstacles and changing their processes, their policies, their procedures to actually overcome some of those obstacles. So we're very supportive of the Better Homes Hub at a neighbourhood level.
Hi, thank you for this. Just two observations. One, we did quite a lot of work pre-COVID with social housing providers in terms of putting some smart city equipment to look at all sorts of things, energy efficiency and security and other things. One of the, and that on in itself, putting monitoring in, turning lights off that aren't used, turning radiators off that aren't used, corridors that are lit, etc. All of that made a significant difference, and I'll come back to an example. But the other one also was looking at how social housing providers work smarter as a company to service the stock that they work with. So, for example, there's a lot of vans out doing maintenance work and understanding the logistics of how those vans are servicing things, going to houses and not knocking on the doors and appointments not being met, so that they're then having to drive back away. We saw a lot more nuance than just simply, and I'm not suggesting this is the case, but just as an example, as the house energy efficiency within the house as a singular thing. The other thing that I did this Christmas was I thought I'm going to put my money where my mouth is when it comes to energy efficiency, because I'm a climate commissioner as well, and I'm trying to look at how we get down to saving 50%. We live in an old house that's difficult to retrofit, so we can't really put more loft insulation because we don't really have that loft space, or there's no cavity, etc. So I just got one of these systems. It's a Tado system that you plug your central heating to. You can control all your radiators through the phone. We've just gone through for the bill for November. I reckon roughly 30 to 50% for something that cost £1,000 to install. So I know we want to focus on insulation, and I applaud all that, but actually, is there a way to do things more cost effectively, more and smarter? And not that what you're doing is not smart. I just mean using some technology to get those bills down straight away. You could go to Argos and get somebody to fit it within a week. You can see those savings, as opposed to loft insulation contractors program, all the rest of it. So, although I applaud all of this, as I say, with a different hat on as a climate commissioner, I'd also say there's some quick and dirty other options. And actually what you could do is, the radiator valves are expensive, they're 70 quid a pop, depending on what let's bulk buy them. Go to someone and say, how many, if we got 10,000 of your radiators to fit them in our homes, you could probably get them for 20 quid a piece, cheaper than doing it through Argos or Amazon. So I think there's a few other options to explore.
A different way of doing stuff, looking at something really. I mean, I'd not heard of that, so it just shows a lot of people won't have. But if we could do something like that, it would revolutionise things very quickly, I think. Ben?
Yes, thank you. I was interested on your next steps, and this is building on Stephen's point really about the design guide for West Yorkshire, and I think that's something that can link also into the issue around the skills training and the roles. I think you can sort of almost combine the two in one document there, because I think people need to be aware of what the specifics are for their home, whether, what are we talking about, insulation, solar panels put on the roof, radiator valve, and for different sort of house types, stone houses and brick houses and so on, that we see across the district. So understanding what is acceptable in planning terms or is achievable for different types of houses, to give people a bit of a shopping list, some ideas to start from, I think is really important. But then linking that back up with, well, who do you need to go and get your radiator valves fitted? There's a whole host of plumbers that we're going to need, or whatever. So that might inspire and link into the skills bit as well. So I think it's on a practical level. It's information, isn't it? And it's for what it is and how you go about it and who you need to speak to. And my other observation was that I had also picked up on that point about it's £31,000 a home, and I also picked up on the point that you actually only save roughly £15,000 over 30 years. So on those metrics, not many people are going to be doing that themselves. So that needs to be fed back into that design guide. That, well, hang on, what is actually realistically doable for people? It makes sort of sense.
No, that is helpful. Thank you very much.
Just speaking on Ben's point, the point about the one-stop shop is to give people that kind of guidance, that where do you go, what do you do? And I also think in terms of the costs and the savings, that's going to be a movable feast, isn't it? That's going to keep changing. The more we establish the market and the supply chain, prices will come down. The more energy prices are fluctuating, the savings will. So that will be a movable feast. So it's really starting the process, giving people the information, developing the supply chain. All these things are very easy to say, not very easy to do. To actually get. And I think the one-stop shop and the Better Homes Hub is a really good way of starting it on a practical level.
Just one point, just picking up on that, and going back to my earlier point about what we did with the social housing, and I would say it's a big challenge and a question for you, is the one thing that we did pick up on was, and I imagine it's worse now with heating, is when all the heating goes down, damp is a big problem with, every housing provider we talked to, it was dilapidation where tenants leave, and it was the one thing I think where you can get legal advice to go and prosecute housing tenancies on things like damp. So if the heating's going down, the walls are getting colder, the damp's going up, and that's where things like the sensors and the other smart stuff can help provide answers to that, opening vents when dryers are on and things like that. So I think there's a blended approach to be had, and I'd welcome to have a look and see what they've got in that hub, to be honest, because understanding what's available to your home and what you can buy now, go and buy So, for example, you can buy one of these wireless sensors now for £100. You wire it in. I've just come to Leeds. It would turn the heating off because I've just left the house because it knows it from my phone. That's £100. You're not heating a house for, for 3 hours. So there's lots of other stuff to be done.
And most housing associations and social landlords are using smart sensors. We're installing smart sensors to actually monitor what's going on within properties. I mean, obviously, this isn't widespread at the moment because they cost to install and you have to build it up, to actually help understand what's happening in properties and help guide the occupiers of properties in how we might actually use those properties more effectively and what the issues are and whether we have to put in passive ventilation or whatever else we have to put in. The one-stop shop hasn't actually been set up yet, so there's nothing to see at the moment. It's just the plans. So.
Thank you, Chair. As described in the paper, the Tower Works scheme that will develop 50 100% affordable homes on a 2.7-acre site that has been vacant for a number of years in the Army area of Leeds. The applicant is a registered provider and is aiming to provide 27 houses and 23 apartments, and they will be made up of 18 socially rented and 32 affordable rented homes. Due to the viability gap, the applicant is seeking £932,775 from the Brownfield Housing Fund to enable the scheme to actually progress. The affordable homes are being built in a sustainable urban location close to major employment opportunities, transport hubs and entertainment, and therefore will play a major part in regenerating and keeping local communities together. The scheme will also support 6 apprentices during the construction of those homes. The scheme is shown to have a benefit cost ratio of 1.4, representing acceptable value money to the Brownfield Housing Fund programme. The Place Regeneration Housing Committee are requested to approve that, subject to the conditions set by the programme appraisal team, the Armley Tower Works scheme proceeds through decision point 4 and work commences on activity 5 delivery.
I am. I've just got an observation that I thought it was a little bit vague about the carbon standards for these homes in the paper, so I might just needs to be.
I'll just check the report, but usually the carbon is in there, and I can check that while we're on today. I'll go through. We always refer to the estimated carbon reductions that each project will provide. With it being a viability issue and a registered provider, they really struggle to provide additional above and beyond exceptional ones. And that is because then there's a viability gap issue, even more significant, which there is nobody there able to fund that. We would like to be able to do that, but as you know, the fund comes with a restriction of the BCR, so that's why we can't provide that. We would all want to provide that, but due to the already having a viability gap, placing extra on there, we can't provide it.
It was just that it wasn't very. It had a metric for the amount of CO2 saved, but I don't think it wasn't very specific about what is what is it in terms of building regulations or in terms of on some of your other reports you're more specific. So the next report is very specific about what the carbon technology is. You see.
I will pass that on to colleagues in the PMA team who write the reports that you would like more detail in there, but that's interesting to know that we'll make sure that's picked up. So the next scheme through, as described in the papers, is the Galeham House project, and that will create 77 new apartments on a site of a derelict former textile warehouse that has been vacant for over 20 years near Bradford City Centre. This is a heritage building and sits in a strategic position in the Goitside Conservation Area and has suffered from long-term neglect leading to major structural issues, water damage, asbestos contamination, and now can only be accessed for surveys via drone. The development is reliant on public sector intervention due to significant viability issues. 1.2 million is being sought from Brownfield Housing Fund towards the total scheme development to enable the scheme to actually progress.
The apartments will be for rent, and therefore the building and its maintenance will be retained by the developer. As such, the applicant is looking at a long-term view and wants to remain in the Bradford area, and is looking to provide enhanced environmental credentials, looking at a fabric-first approach, maximising the performance of components and materials that make up the building itself, and looking to provide a high-quality building with a modern extension on top of the building, and to also help to reduce energy consumption for the residents by delivering a building that will be powered by renewable energies. All apartments will be wheelchair accessible, with 8 being fully DDA compliant. The scheme will also provide local economic benefits by providing job opportunities through the creation of 9 new building manager posts and apprenticeships in building management, facilities management and sales and marketing. The benefit cost ratio for the scheme is 1.1, and is categorised as acceptable value for money to the Brownfield Housing Fund programme. The Place and Regeneration and Housing Committee are requested to approve that, subject to the conditions of the programme appraisal team, that the Galeham House project proceeds through decision point 4 and work commences on activity 5 delivery.
Sorry, my observation again on this one is the opposite of the other one, which was this is very specific about the carbon credentials and obviously bring back a heritage building, but there's no affordable housing in this scheme. So,
I could come on to that. So in terms, they are doing very high levels of green carbon, which is why that might be more detailed referenced. In terms of the affordable homes, the planning permission, which is outside the control of the combined authority, allows it not to have affordable in there, and again that's due to the significant viability issues on there, and again that would be changing the actual planning permission, but also the funding of that would make it even more unviable, and we wouldn't be able to fund that viability gap. It's all with the amount of funding that we have put forward is a reduction in the request that was originally there, so the viability gap is more than what the request is from our fund.
All right, are we happy with the scheme? Okay, thank you. As we're not quorate, we shall have to ask Ben still to take this through delegation. Okay, thanks very much. And then the last item is the Safer Parks update. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I brought a paper to this committee in July last year, just highlighting the work that we were doing on research to investigate women and girls' views on parks and their safety or unsafety in them. We also talked to professionals about their views of parks, and I just wanted to bring this summary of the report, which is now being published. It was published in December, and there's a link to it, just to bring that to the attention of the committee and some of the conclusions. We know a lot more now about women and girls and how they feel in parks. Not everyone feels the same, frustratingly. Not all of these people have the same opinion, but there are lots of areas of consensus which we can use to build on. And right now we're working on some guidance, design and management guidance, which picks up on those views and perceptions to influence the way new parks are designed and existing parks can be changed. We recognise that there's very little money to spend in parks out there, and so, you know, in terms of designing new parks, that's a way that can be done for a very low cost, just by in terms of layout. But when changes are made to existing parks, we think that some of these can be done differently using different design principles that we're drawing up now in terms of the guidance that we're writing. That guidance is being driven by a steering group made up of the Combined Authority, the University of Leeds, Keep Britain Tidy, and Make Space for Girls, who are a campaign group who campaign for a better provision for girls and women in parks. So more on that to be brought to the committee later if you're interested in that. But one thing I wanted to kind of highlight in this meeting in particular, and was raised in a previous item, is the fact that we'd like to now test some of the ideas and design principles that we're drawing up in the guidance in a real project, in a real park, and we're looking at funding that could be found privately or locally in public sector agencies to fund and test the idea of changes being made in parks and how and assess through academic research how well that works. So it was just really to get your views on the report, if you've managed to read it, or the summary, and also to get your views on our next steps as well.
Thanks for that, Helen. I think it's an excellent report, and I think there's been a lot of progress, particularly in other people's areas. I know in Wakefield, we've just done some improvements to our main park with a fabulous children's play area, but not as enclosed, so that women don't feel trapped in a mugger area. But we've got 2 zip wires so that people can challenge each other, and it's going really well. And the park is so busy, and it's making everyone feel so much safer. So a lot of what you're saying we've put into operation in Wakefield, and it's working really well. Any comments, anyone? Are we all happy with this? Lisa?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you had. Thank you. I don't know if you've had any thoughts yet about which parks, or it just occurred to me, having worked on the town fund work with Morley, that they've got an awful lot of work going on in parks there, and it'll be at the stage where they're doing some design work. I don't know whether whether you tapped into that, and just to acknowledge the unfortunate term mugger areas. I know it's a general term, but I don't like it.
You can pronounce it Muga, but then people still don't understand. Again, it's one of those things that I think needs a new name as well. And Muga, for people who don't know what one is a multi-use games area, and it's one of those fenced-off areas where typically we have found boys tend to dominate and girls feel unsafe because they feel trapped in them unless they've got lots of entrances and exits. Thanks for raising the issue about busyness in parks. We found that makes a massive difference to how women and girls feel in them if there are other people and particularly other women and girls. So we need to build spaces that are not only safe but fun and attractive, because you can make it safe, but if there's nobody there, you still won't feel safe.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Helen. Where might the funding come from?
Well, we know that Yorkshire Sport Foundation want to do similar work. They've produced a report recently, very, very similar vein. So we might ask them if they'd like to partner on a scheme. There are also organisations, friends groups and parks organisations, community organisations that we might work with to try to find funding. That, we haven't got very far on looking for that funding yet, but I think that you can probably do quite a lot with quite a little, or we might look to work with private developers on new parks where it is just a case of changing the ideas of the provision and the design to be in line with the guidance principles.
I heard something on the radio the other day, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, that's happening in North Yorkshire. Have you heard this? In Harrogate, Ripon, and I forget the other one. They're putting boxes for donations towards the park.
It's something that, working with Keep Britain Tidy, who work very closely with parks and also with our research involving members from parks management, we're acutely aware of the very little amount of funding available. We had in my local park recently a light show which charges for entry, but that's something that parks organisation, they're finding they need to do to just fund maintenance of the existing park at the moment. So it is a real problem, but one which we think, you know, there's so many benefits from getting people to use parks more. It's carbon benefits in getting people to physically active and physical and health benefits as well, that we still think that these things are so important that we need to address them.
I think parks have always been underfunded, and I'm just going on about Wakefield, but what we decided during the pandemic, because people were using parks, there's nowhere else to go, we put £5 million of our own money into our parks, and now it's all coming to fruition because we're having new play areas in every park across our district, and it's really gone down well. With the people of our district, and we've got young women's keep fit groups coming and operating in the parks, putting classes on at weekends, and they're all out in the park, and it's making it so much busier so that people feel safe going for a walk or doing something. So we took a decision, it's nearly 3 years now, to invest in parks because they were so underfunded with maintenance, as you say, Helen, and so it's really paid off for us.
Thanks, Chair. I just think it's brilliant that West Yorkshire, in combination with the university, is leading the way in this space. I just want to flag there might be an opportunity, maybe through the pipeline work that we spoke about before, to identify some of those opportunities where new development, new infrastructure development includes new open spaces, which might create some opportunities for partnership. I also want to take the opportunity just to flag through Homes England, we have a learning programme that happens every summer and winter now, and this in the coming weeks we've got sessions. I know Helen's attending one already. They're for local authorities, combined authorities, and we open them up to RPs as well, but they're available online via YouTube later for everybody to see. We've got 2 sessions. One is about inclusive spaces and places for girls and young people, so that's with Make Space for Girls on 31st of Jan, and then creating urban spaces that work for women on the 2nd of February. So if people did want to find out more about it, then those sessions are available. And as I say, will be available more widely afterwards.
I keep forgetting, having to keep reminding me, aren't we? Yes, so that concludes the public part of the meeting. We have now a private session. So does anybody want a break before we